Hello everyone. Next to craving. The very word of mindfulness itself is among the biggest misunderstandings among modern practitioners. There are a variety of different ways people think that they are practicing mindfulness, and I do not think any of those are in line with the Suttas, most of the time. The Buddha was very clear, very specific, and even gave great similes for mindfulness. Yet most people ignore those, as it is easier to follow modern teachers that speak in a more familiar way, but that deviates quite far from the Suttas. Today we try to find out what mindfulness really is and how to correctly practice things like mindfulness of the body. Let us start with one of the more common myths. When people think of mindfulness nowadays, the majority of people would likely respond with something like, well, sensation watching. They are observing whatever is going on in their bodies and try to catch everything that their senses provide. This is mindfulness for them. It is not 100% wrong, but the true core of that kind of practice is so small that you might as well not do it at all. Very related to this is also the entire arsenal of body scanning techniques, as well as labeling, noting, and knowing, creating a sense of observer or watcher. All those revolve around the very same thing, finding the secrets of the universe in the sense objects, in the perceptions, while they are somewhere entirely different. Very related to that are the intense focusing practices. One might even argue that they are even more wrong than the previous techniques. While you can do all of those practices in a somewhat right way if you are already of the right view, it is never about the sensation watching or anything. It is your right view that makes it right, and no one can make basically anything right. So are those good for people without the right view? Well, of course not. And focusing is even more misleading, as you are now zooming in on just one thing. Again, what does that have to do with sati and remembering? And is there even any connection between nibbana and focusing that you could tell? Or is it just something that you have to take by faith? Well, I do not see it, and never found a good explanation in the Suttas or any good explanation by any modern teacher. Well, how did the Buddha teach mindfulness? Why can't you have enough of it? Why is it even essential? How does it work? Let us start with how the Buddha defined mindfulness. And before we dive into that, here's a short list of synonyms, just so we are on the same page. People nowadays use the word presence, awareness, memory, non-forgetting, knowing. All those things are used synonymous for mindfulness. Anyway, so mindfulness or sati simply means remembering or non-forgetting. This is a literal translation for mindfulness. And the Buddha was very true to that translation, and he used it exactly in that sense. You could define it as not being absorbed in the particularities of your experience, but as a broad awareness. You assume a second, non-absorbed point of view and cannot forget as a result. And that requires precisely non-absorption, or forgetting requires absorption. You have to do something else to forget. If you are not absorbed in something else, then you do not forget. And in the Suttas, for example, Majjhima Nikaya number 119, it is explained as follows. And how is mindfulness of the body developed? Well, having folded his legs crosswise, straightened his body, and having brought mindfulness to the pause. Just mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. Breathing in long, he knows, I breathe in long. Or breathing out long, he knows, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he knows, I breathe in short. And breathing out short, he knows, I breathe out short. Furthermore, when walking, the monk discerns, I am walking. When standing, he discerns, I am standing. When sitting, he discerns, I am sitting. However his body is disposed, that is how he discerns it. And as you can see, you literally remember in the present moment the posture that you are in. You remember the teachings. You remember the Dhamma. This is what mindfulness is. It's remembering. It's remembering in the present in what posture you are. You are not forgetting how the body is disposed. You're always having the body posture watched from the corner of your eyes. And another way I like to display it is as a small thought experiment. Imagine being a young mother with a single beloved child. She had maybe difficulties getting pregnant, but it finally worked after a long time. And when she has to leave her newborn alone for the first time, there will not be a second without her thinking of her child, without her child being on her mind. She will not forget her child. And that is what proper mindfulness is like. The Buddha explained mindfulness as non-forgetting, recollectedness of things, remembering the teaching. And mindfulness arises of the result of not being absorbed and not focused on specific objects, but having a very broad context of experience. True mindfulness is based on not ignoring anything. You don't want to shut out all the senses or something like that, but you want to include everything, so to speak, being pulled by nothing, and thus you cannot really forget. And while the young mother example is not from the Metta Sutta itself, it should illustrate the point quite well. When you practice, for example, mindfulness of death, the Buddha said that you are only doing it right if you don't forget death for even as long as it takes to take a bite of rice. Only then are you remembering death correctly. That is roughly how much time, the mind of the mother would be with her newborn. So in that sense, it is quite clear why mindfulness is remembering or not forgetting. The mother is not absorbed in whatever she has to do, but there is a part of her mind that is always pretty much with her child. So as you can imagine, you can remember a lot of things, and all of them are in some sense mindfulness. That said, the Buddha did not really teach just Sati, he did teach Samasati, or right Sati, right mindfulness. Mindfulness that is leading to liberation. An athlete can be very non-absorbed and yet totally not moving towards liberation, even if there's no craving in his experience right now due to the flow state or something like that. Yet he is fully engulfed within Mara's domain. In practicing Sati, you remember the present, you remember the Dhamma, you remember the teachings, you remember in the present, and the Dhamma meaning unownability, for example, and anicca of all things. And you can only remember that when you have understood it, because you can only remember things that are there. So you have to get that knowledge from somewhere, and then you can remember it. And the stream enterer only really has to remember that, and that is all he must do. So the difference between Sati and right Sati is like day and night. One is ripening and liberation, and the other is quite mundane. But on that level, it is still good for the practitioner, just not liberation level good. And the difference between right Sati and wrong Sati is precisely the right view or stream entry. The right view always comes first on the path to Nibbana, which is stated in, I think, Majjhima Nikaya number 111? No, 117, probably. And the Buddha was very explicit when it comes to that. The right view is precisely what allows all parts of the practice to be right. And right just means skillful, wholesome, or leading to Nibbana. So how do you cultivate that right Sati? After all, we are almost by definition doing it wrongly until becoming Sotapannas. Well, I could make it easy on myself and tell you that it is just the entire training that the Buddha laid out. And that would be true. More precisely, all your striving should be directed at attaining the right view, which has other preconditions. Those starting with keeping the precepts and restraint, enduring, and later mental restraint, enduring boredom and the neutral feeling, and much more. I have many videos on that topic already, and I don't want to repeat myself too much. Or in short, anything that creates distance from the senses is good, in quotation marks. You cultivate mindfulness by removing the obstacles. You cultivate remembering by removing the reasons for forgetting. So anyway, what is mindfulness particularly good for? So the first and most immediate benefit would be that you can now see from afar when something is about to have you forget. You can now pull the leash on the mind by simply remembering the teaching, by remembering that it's bad for you. You can take countermeasures to avoid that situation. Or in other words, you can guard the sense doors. And whenever something possibly harmful comes along your way, you are especially careful. It is a bit like in the simile of the water buffalo from the Suttas. You don't have to smack it with a stick all the times. You just have to be careful around harvest time when the animal is agitated, and it is the same with the mind. You only have to watch and guard it closely if there are things that are a potential danger for the mind. And once you also have the right view, the practical benefits are even more numerous, and an entire host of new practices is now available. In fact, basically all of the mindfulness of X practices from the suttas presuppose a right view. Without that, they are simply not leading to liberation. You can only remember your right view when you have attained it before. And again, mindfulness is remembering. And the Sotapanna knows wholesome and unwholesome as unwholesome. And based on that, he can make any practice right. Everyone else must figure that out first. And that will surely not just happen based on some magical method that makes you feel good. How would that ever help you see that you yourself are doing or fueling your suffering? That is just impossible. So to end up at that knowledge, you must very much understand your experience and your part in it. That is the key. That is the thing that most people ignore about the Dhamma. Again, the only reason suffering may be stopped is the fact that you do it in the first place. That is the only reason why you can be free from any circumstance. So we have all the different mindfulness types. Mindfulness of body or the breathing, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, heart, mood, and mindfulness of thought, dhammas, phenomena. We have mindfulness of our intentions, which is basically virtue, and mindfulness of death. And then we also have the recollection, which is also mindfulness of the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, pretty much mindfulness of the teaching. And what on earth do all those things have in common, in case you have not understood it yet? Well, it is easy. They are all a type of memory of the Dhamma that you have understood. You remember your right view, remember the teachings, remember the Dhamma, remember anicca. In whatever way you want to phrase it, you remember what the Buddha was teaching. In short, remembering anything that induces dispassion, that can only lead to more dispassion and thus more Dhamma, so to speak. So are modern mindfulness methods wrong? Well, by the Sutta standards, quite often, yes. And by quite often, I mean almost exclusively. I don't know of many modern methods and techniques that are very right. Are there still benefits to those? Well, kind of. But it is clear that it's more of a despite of and not a because of. And sometimes practices get certain things right as a byproduct, almost by accident, which is fine as long as you know those things as such. And when you are really convinced that a focus on a smile or a good feeling in meditation will liberate you, then you have cultivated the end of your path, pretty much. The right view is the right direction of practice. So when your practice does not lead to more dispassion, you are on a wrong path. Anyway, let us now come to the most important points. First, most modern interpretations of mindfulness are wrong. They make mindfulness something that is very different from remembering. Sati means remembering, non-forgetting, and not sensation watching, not being absorbed. None of those. First, it is a mental restraint or awareness presence, and later it is a remembering the teaching. Only based on the right view will you do your mindfulness practices rightly. Before anything else, strive for that. And after the right view, you stop doing the memorizing altogether. And even before that, you have to try to stop actively doing the memory, doing the mindfulness. Because you aren't. Remembering will just happen if you allow it. Anyway, that should be enough for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy what I do, feel free to like and subscribe. But until then,